Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Ranching Reboot, the podcast that reboots your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. I'm your host, Brian Alexander, and this is episode 164. We're going to pick back up on the conversation with Bob Kinford and revisit a couple things from last week's episode. But first, a few words about our sponsor, Land Trust, the Land Access Network. Whitetail permit draw applications are closed in Kansas as this episode comes out, and the draw should be happening soon. In addition to helping connect landowners with sportsmen, Land Trust has a new service called Land Trust Plus that offers draw insurance for your trip. Land Trust Plus is, according to founder and CEO Nick, the ultimate toolkit to plan and book amazing hunting experiences with confidence. More on Land Trust Plus next week. Start planning your fall hunting trips now with Land Trust by just clicking the link in the show notes. Like I said, Bob Kinford, my guest this week, we're going to pick the conversation up kind of about where we left it last week. So here we go.
Hi, Bob. You sure didn't get any prettier.
Well, I just didn't wax the top of my head this morning. If I would have done that, then
What-
I'd be shiny.
What do you use to get that good shine? I mean, I'm going to need it in a couple years, so.
Well, actually, you do realize that I've only got a bald spot on the top, and the rest of it I just cut off. I'm not bringing
okay.
this fall. This is all false advertising.
That's fair.
You know,
That's fair.
I mean, I do occasionally think about just getting some Nair and rubbing it all over my head,
Okay.
and then I never have to cut my hair again. You know, it's like you being too lazy to shave.
Hey, now.
Oh, you saw me about a month and a half ago.
Yeah. Yeah, you were a little furry then too. That's
Yeah.
all right. So, you had to go a couple of days ago when we were recording, and things were just starting to get interesting. You're, I guess, you've talked before about bison, about how bison megahertz and how the bison grazed.
Well, and how everything else grazed with it, that we're just looking at the bison and nothing else.
Right. Okay. I think I've got some issues with some of that because what we think that we observed from the plains animals, we observed in a very, very narrow window of time. And it was a system that was undergoing such dramatic change, even while we were observing it and making these observations about the bison and other herds. So let me explain. We've got to go back to 1491 when Columbus came over from Europe and brought European diseases. Maybe it wasn't Columbus on the first trip, second trip, whatever, but that opened the floodgates for what they call the Colombian exchange of, plants and animals and diseases between North, South America and Europe, right? Well, we know he brought malaria, smallpox, and yellow fever over. We're pretty sure that wiped out between the bottom end number I've seen is like 80%, the top end number is like 95%. So between 80 and 95% of the Native Americans succumbed to these European diseases.
Wasn't malaria an African disease though, not a European?
I think you're right. I think malaria did come from Africa, but it was very well established in
Europe,
in England, and in Europe by this time. So we know all the Native Americans used the bison for a food source, right? That's pretty well established in our history and in our legend. So when almost all the hunting pressure gets removed off their prey population, like they were using bison, what happens to the numbers of the bison? They explode, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no more downward population pressure hunting them. And by the same logic, you could extend that out to some other species too, but let's just focus on the bison. So the next That starts in like 1500. Okay. Now there were, there were Russians or Chinese or Spanish up and down the coast of California, like in the 1600s. There were Spanish, moving up towards Santa Fe, 1600. So there were some like early entries into the plains, but most of what was happening on the east coast of the U.S. So the I guess the decline of some of those tribes is a little bit better documented and how they came down. But what's not documented is what happened on the plains. So those diseases start ravaging the population in the plains around 1500. It was almost 300 years before white people came out here to the plains. So we've lost Bob again. Maybe he'll come back. So where did I lose you at? What were you
on everything
what did I
getting
just
wiped
say?
out by
You
we
did-
don't know.
It's not a matter of right or wrong, I don't think. It's just a matter of saying
Our perspective
we've-
on
we've-
what's going on right now isn't
this
even
perspective
right.
that we've had has been not right. So to say that, we're going to manage like the bison herds, or we're going to try to mimic what the bison did, I think that's a fallacy. I think that what we observed
we
in a
have
very narrow window of time about the bison in the 1800s, I think we were seeing a population
Yeah,
that
but they're-
was still
the numbers
undergoing
were
massive
probably different.
change in an ecosystem that was undergoing massive change. I think, hold on a second. So I feel like when the mountain men, the beaver trapping era, like that was really going on in the 1700s. They talk about those guys going from, places back east, like, Louisiana,
Yeah.
like, Missouri and Kentucky and Illinois, and they go to the mountains to trap beaver, right? You can't go from Missouri to the mountains to trap beaver without going across the plains.
But you've got to
They
realize
live here.
what were they
Beavers
going
live
for?
here
They were
now
going
on our
for the
creeks and
fur.
rivers. They had to have been living here.
Which is going to have
200-300 years.
the best fur? The ones in the plains, or is it going to be the prime pelts are going to be up
Right.
in the mountains where it really gets cold? So they're putting on a heavier fur coat. So the plains beavers were probably just about ignored, because that's human nature. We're just going to go for the cream of the crop. We're not going to, we're not going to.
You probably have a point.
They did.
But
they got
I
trapped
still
out,
think that
and
all the
then-
beavers through the
then we
plains got
dynamited
trapped
them
out
out
during that
and-
era.
because you can't have those beaver ponds out, down there, because it's covering up all that could be grass. We could make a hay meadow there if it wasn't for that stinking beaver pond. So we changed
Right.
that. But as far as the mimicking nature, now our observations are really bad on as far as what the numbers were, what they were doing. It's a narrow time window, but the fact that they did migrate and occasionally get into big mega herds that just really tore up the ground, that
Yes.
part was accurate. They would have done that when the numbers were larger, smaller, whatever, as long as they're still getting to act like bison. And because the animals in Africa do the same thing. What we fail to really look at is the fact that they're not in those mega herds all the time, and they're not yet, even when they're out, if they've got a little small herd of 1,000 head, there might be sometimes they come in close on the density, but most of the time they're scattered out a little bit, and they are being very selective. And they're being very, they're going for their nutrition. I mean, they don't have that tub of cake, and nobody's going to bring them a bale of hay. So they've got to go for the highest nutrition. So where's the highest nutrition? Top third of the plant. Top one half of the plant. What happens when you take top one half to one third, or one third to one half of the plant? You're leaving a whole bunch of solar panel behind so that that plant can recover. And as they move through, there's going to be a different species of animal move through. They may be following the same path. They may be following a different one, but those places are going to get grazed more than once in the growing season, but they're going to be having something different grazed every time. So we're turning around and we're saying that we're going to mimic nature. We're going to take and put 500 head on a half an acre, fence them in there for 3 or 4 hours, and then we're going to take and move them to the next half acre. And we're not looking at the plant physiology, or the diversity, or the animal physiology. It's like we were talking the other day, where when they eat that whole plant and they're eating the lower quality part of the plant, their rumen works harder and they get overheated and they want to go sit in the shade, versus those animals like Ricky's that eat the top third of the plant and they're perfectly comfortable. They ignore the shade to sit out in 107-degree weather. And that's black cows. So those black cows are more heat tolerant by eating that top third rather than the whole plant. Don't you think that all of your other ruminants, your bison and elk and whatever, would basically naturally be doing the same thing? Because that would assure their survival.
You'd think they would. You'd think they'd just take. Yeah,
Which
you'd
means
think
that
they'd just take
density is
that
gonna
one
be
bite
different
of the
because
best stuff and then
that
keep
particular
moving
plant,
on.
you might have individual plants or what I really noticed in looking at some of those pictures that Ricky had was that you'd have a patch, maybe 3 foot by 4 foot of one type of grass, and right next to it would be another patch, because you could tell when you looked at her pictures, that the different ones had been grazed at different levels, and it was pretty patchwork. But that one area, each area that was grazed different would be grazed off just like a stinking mower. I mean, it was just flat. So we're not looking at, we really need to get somebody smarter than me by a long shot to go out and start really studying how the wild animals eat. And I don't even know if that even works anymore, because we've screwed up everything so much by human pressure that these animals don't do anything hardly that they would have done even 100 years ago.
Let's explore that for a minute. Do you think that's like epigenetic, or is that just learned behavior?
Where do you find elk now?
Because how we keep livestock.
Where did they start out at? Okay. They all moved
Mountains.
up into the mountains to get away from the people. Okay.
Plains, elk are
One
plains
of the
animals.
things those beaver trappers did, if they had the Indians getting after them, if they were close to Yellowstone, they would cut through Yellowstone to get away from the Indians, because the Indians wouldn't follow them into Yellowstone. They believed it was evil spirits. And those trappers claim that there was no wildlife in Yellowstone. So now Yellowstone's got all this wildlife up there, and most of it has been pushed in by civilization. And then the Park Service, we can't let these bison die. We got to start feeding them. And that's what caused the whole Yellowstone ecological problem was, you just keep feeding and feeding and feeding. Well, of course they're going to overgraze it. They feed it and they don't cull. They get over 7,000 elk going into Jackson Hole every year for the feeding ground.
Yeah,
You go around Wyoming and they've got wildlife feeding stations. So how are these animals that okay, we're feeding them all this stuff, how are they even behaving even close to what they did in nature? And that's not even that's not even considering all your haystacks and everything on your ranches.
Yeah.
That you go out there in the morning and hell, you got 50 white-tailed deer and or 100 elk out there eating off your haystack.
I'm thinking of all the corn that gets dumped on the
Well,
ground or put in deer feeders to
that's a
feed,
whole other deal. They do a lot of that
for
down here.
deer, food plots that get
It's
put
not
in.
even hunting. It's okay. Well, which one of these bucks do you want? Okay, well, he'll be over here at 4:00. We'll get there at about 3:30, and we'll just sit there and wait, and then you got your shot. And then, of course, the guy, I it's it's a scheduled bait and shoot for for the
Is that really
adrenaline rush of
hunting,
killing
or
something,
is that
because
just like a
those guys
scheduled bait
don't
and
even,
shoot?
they have somebody else resting out their deer and everything, and most of them don't even eat the meat. But the thing is everything that we've done has changed that wild animal behavior. So we're having to figure out a hell of a lot more than just, oh, they were grazing at 1,000,000 pounds density. There's a lot more to it than that. And, we kind of need to watch in fact, I think it'd be better going back to Wild Kingdom from the 60s and looking at those videos you could probably tell more about, uh, get a better idea of how the animals, uh, act in the wild from that than you do from watching the wild herds now, because there's just been so much destruction of habitat and hunting pressure and everything else. Nothing is working the way it was. It's like you talking about the beaver ponds. Like you talking about the beaver ponds actually keeping herds from crossing streams and
I mean,
areas.
I can see that.
And you're absolutely right on that. They're not going to cross at that beaver pond, because a lot of those beaver ponds, it's pretty boggy getting out to the water.
Yes. Okay. And that was a point that I kind of wanted to get to earlier. So if we're looking at, in my mind, like the river that I live on, the Medicine River, where it's farmed on both sides, I can see how that would pretty easily have been like the beaver bog level. And part of my point with the bison and how their migratory patterns and movement patterns may have changed over time, especially since 1500 and the Colombian exchange started, is how willing would bison be to cross a beaver bog that was
I don't
500
think
yards
they'd be that
wide
stupid.
and is going to be belly deep in mud and water? I don't think they'd be that willing. So did we have, did, right, because you get in the water, you get slow, you're an easy target for wolves. So how much did the beaver bogs, and the way they had rivers and creeks dammed up, how much did that impede the movement and migration of bison 500 years ago?
It gave more water sources, so they could migrate further distances. You look at
But instead of
Well,
crossing them, they would have to
yes and
stay
no, because
more on
you'll
the
get a
ridge
series
tops.
of beaver dams, and then you'll get an area where you don't have any beaver dams for. I mean, it wasn't solid beaver dam, so they would, you had those beaver dams which would be holding water, and it would allow
Right.
animals to drink, but the streams keep flowing down below those beaver dams where a herd can go through and they can drink, and then they can go up the other side. Well, yeah, I realize you're not.
I'm not saying that
Well,
like they couldn't get past
yeah,
beaver
it
dams. I'm
allowed
just
them to
saying that
move
it
more.
had a massive
If
change
if you just
to
took
the
right
movement
now the
pattern
way things are,
of
ripped
how the
out all the
bison move.
fences, turned out bison out there, uh, and just let them roam the prairie, and turned off all your wells, they wouldn't survive. They wouldn't have the water. We don't have the water cycle that we did back then, and that the beaver were just part of the water cycle.
Yeah.
So the beaver actually enabled them to have a larger range rather than a smaller one. I mean, that's well, if okay. Do you
I'm
have any
struggling
water
with that,
problems
but
on
I'm
your
going to go
ranch with
along
that?
with you.
If you pulled all the fences out of your ranch, your cattle could graze from up there at the highway and go clear down to the river. They would have no problem drinking, right? So if you got if yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, if we didn't have any fences or any
Now
roads or
you take
any
away your
impediments to
beavers,
cattle movement, I mean, yeah, they
and
could
what
find
happens to your
drink.
water? It all exactly. Well, would you even have the creek?
It all
Is,
leaves,
is the way
and instead of
the
having
way you have
ponds, I've
right
got
now
a creek.
in the drought that you're in right now? Would you still have the creek there without the beaver dams?
Um, I'm gonna
Because
say
I
probably,
when I was a kid
but
in
how much
California,
water
we
would
would
be in
get
it?
some droughts,
Definitely less.
and the creeks would
Definitely
some of
less.
those creeks would just dry up to where there would just be a little pool here and a little pool there, and there'd be hell, quarter mile, half mile down to the next water.
I've seen that. I My creek on the west side of the ranch, well, there's a couple of creeks over there, and that water cycle just isn't it's not quite as far along as it is on the east side of the ranch. Haven't had time and money to focus over there. Excuse me. Uh, when it
Yeah,
does get dry, those couple of those creeks over there, they quit running. They'll just be mud hole, 20 yards, mud hole, 20 yards, mud hole. But when
yeah.
it's good, there's beavers over there. Hasn't been in several years because it's, you know,
Well, yes, that's
I thought we
the
were done
way
with
droughts
the
work.
drought last year, but apparently not. We
Everybody
just
gets
got a
all
little bit of
excited
a
down
break.
here when we get a good rain year, and it's like, well, don't worry, it'll be back next year. It's
Oh, we got a question. We got a question in chat. So Ross wants to know, without the beaver, would the
probably.
bison have overgrazed areas next to water sources, just like our cattle do now in a set stock single tank system? Um, I, I-
Well, yeah,
Probably,
that's your
but I would
I
also
think
think
that's
that they
your
would move
driving force
on
behind,
when they exhaust their food
and
source because
okay,
they're not going to be
let me
confined by a
back up.
fence.
I was wrong. Uh, I was using my artificial intelligence side of my brain. Um, they're going on nutrition. So they're not going to want to sit there and eat that down to nothing and then have to move. they would probably graze out around an area before they moved on, but once they got so far out, they would probably go, I would assume they'd go looking for more food and water. But there again, we're talking about that. The 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 wolves would have followed them just because the wolves aren't going to sit there and let the bison leave without you know I mean, they don't have a freezer or anything to put a couple extra bison in, so they're going to have to go with their food source. Everything gets driven by food and water, so they're going to have to migrate.
Right.
But I don't think that we were ever at a point where the water cycle was as bad as it is now. I mean, I think this is probably, for North America, the worst time. This is the worst water cycle's ever been. Now, I have seen where the Mayans down on the in Central America at one time totally had Central America turned into desert just because of the fact of corn and irrigation. You know me, is there a bottom to it?
Okay. How deep you want to jump in a rabbit hole with me, Bob? So this is a long one.
Oh,
I
that's
want to
easy.
know what Arizona and the Colorado River Delta looked like 200 years ago. That's what I want to know. I want to know what it looked like when there was 12 million acre feet of water going through that estuary to the ocean. Now here's what I'm going to say. And this is going to be, it's out there. Did damming up the Colorado River and pumping all that water over 2 mountain ranges to California
big time
to grow strawberries in the desert,
big time.
how is that affecting our drought here in Kansas in the Panhandle? And yes, I agree with you. So if we take the 12 to 14 million acre feet, not gallons. Shit, that's like a way smaller number. 12 to 15 million acre feet of water.
Now,
Pump over 2
just
mountain
wait a minute.
ranges using a fantastic amount
In
of
the
energy
droughts,
to grow
they cut back the
strawberries
waters to the
and
farmers so they can
other
fill up their
delicate
swimming
produce
pools.
crops in a desert.
And just letting that water go out doesn't do anything because the water cycle has been so destroyed.
Yes.
If you look back at how the Spanish explorers that first came through, they stuck to the Rio Grande River going up because they didn't know where water was to the side. They were sending out, they send out parties looking for water and couldn't find any other water other than alongside of the river. Kit Carson, John C. Fremont, and all those trappers, Jim Bridger, all the way from Austin, Texas, San Angelo, Texas, all the way out to Arizona was a big savanna. They called it a sea of grass, but they only crossed during the monsoon season because that's when all the seasonal rivers were going. So when you look at it now, it is much bare ground as we have, and as fast as it's being added to, storms don't have a chance to make it in. I mean, we're sending up a massive amount of heat into the air, which totally changes the way the storm tracks go. Oh, dust? You mean that thick air? That thick air?
And dust. Because, well, dust particles Yeah, dust particles in the atmosphere prevent moisture from condensing into clouds into
Yeah.
droplets. So it's kind of like the
And
drier and dustier it is, the
and until
drier
we
and
can find a
dustier
way
it's
to
going to be
convince people that,
and
you
continue.
can reverse this stuff on the ground and start
So
getting more rain, if we can get enough people doing this, it's just going to keep getting kind of worse.
I agree. Do you think that trying to work in the plains
Makes it harder.
is a losing battle
Makes it
because
harder for damn
there's
sure.
nothing being done in
And
Arizona
there's getting to
and
be
northwest Mexico?
more stuff going on in northwestern Mexico. Fernando was telling me the other day that he'd just come off a consulting job on a couple different ranches down in Sonora, Mexico. So, they're getting their range of influence, and those, I tell you what, Alejandro and Fernando and that whole group of guys down there, they are making some huge differences there. But it's still, you got to get westward, you got to get over closer to the ocean to get enough rain coming east to really make a difference. And the thing is, well, yeah, that's
And a lot of people would think that's kind of backwards because you
when
need to
I
go
first
east
got
for the
down
rain.
here. I mean, it would cloud up. It looked like it's really going to rain during monsoon season. You get these big old puffballs going by, and they'd be collecting up, and you could see, when they're gone 100 miles away, it would rain the other side of Pecos, which is 90 miles away. So those clouds are gathering moisture as they go, but the further they have to go to get
Okay.
big enough to rain, the further east they are. Those clouds start forming in the west and just keep collecting more and more and more until they get enough to rain. Well, they're not getting enough to rain till you get further east. And even East Texas is in a drought.
I mean,
So we really need to get California and
that
Arizona
makes
working
sense.
on it. We just need to get everybody working on it.
Makes a lot of sense.
But it's hard for people, their belief system has told them, and universities have been backing it up forever, that, oh, well, this doesn't work. There's nothing to it. And then you have the fact that everybody wants to do it with fences. You got to do it with fences, and it's all labor intensive. That doesn't help either. Because if they're looking at it, I mean, this guy I was talking to the other day, that, in fact, I'm going to be going on to one of his other places where he does still have some cows left, and doing some work for him over there. And he told me, well, you can't get them close enough to do that without a lot of work. And I keep trying to explain to him what I do. And I know he's driven by places where I had cows out there going as a herd, and like everybody used to tease me when I got down here, well, are you raising cattle or sheep? But they can't click on them on how easy it is to get them to do that. So they think it's a big labor intensive deal when it isn't. And they've got more important things to do than sit out there and build electric fence and move cows all day. They just don't
Yeah.
have the time and money to do that down here when you could make a 200-acre pasture in some places, and you wouldn't have enough to feed a cow. So we've got to find a way to get those paradigms changed to where they can open their minds and step out and be looking at 5 or 6 different boxes at once, rather than just staying in their one box, or say, okay, well, we're going to step from here over to Jim Garish's box or Elizandro's box, or you know what I mean? It takes kind of a combination. Or, I mean, face it, the only reason that
Yeah.
Alan Savory came up with the fences is because nobody wanted to spend time with their cattle. In Africa, they herd them, and they put them into a corral at night.
Right. And so you've heard me say this before. Okay. The technology between what you're just talking about, what they do in Africa, herding cattle on foot, moving cattle on horseback like you do with IMG, doing daily moves with polywire. It's all the same technology.
Well, I'm not using.
We're using technology to control the movement of livestock. Or we're using tools to control the movement of livestock. Just bear with me. So herding on foot, herding on horseback, or having them contained with polywire or barbed wire fences. It's the same thing. You're controlling the movement of the livestock. Now, you have much more granular control when you're moving them, herding them around on foot or on horseback. You can make sure they stay out of the area they were in yesterday. When you're doing that with a fence, you actually have to physically build the fence. But my point is, it's still kind of the same. It's the same task. We're just using different levels of technology to do it. And by extension, you could talk about the GPS collars, which is it's still doing the same task. It's just a much higher level of technology. And let me finish. So the purpose of all of this technology and these things, these tools that we use, is just to replace the human labor. And that's what we're trying to avoid in agriculture, is actually having to get out and do physical work. That's why we build tools. That's why we design systems. So
I'm going to go down to Badgerville.
So we get to do less physical work.
The herding is not technology. The herding is just getting out there and keeping track of where your animals are, because it's easier to keep track of them than it is to decide, okay, well, we've used up all of our jerky and biltong, and now we have to go find some more animals. So now you got to go out and hunt. Or do you want to just have them there to where you know where they're at and you can just go out and knock one off? Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And what I'm doing isn't technology.
Well, it'd be a lot easier if you knew where they were. You didn't have to go run around for 3 days with a sharp stick looking
animal
for
behavior. And I mean, you've worked around me a time or two, and you don't really have to put too much damn effort into it. And that allows you to, if I was set up, like if I was in Kansas and you're all working off of those dams, I could be working at least 3 herds of 1,500 cows each by myself. I'd only need day work when it's time to brand and time to ship, and I would have them in the pens before the branding and shipping crew got there. So how much labor is that?
Okay.
Well, compared to electric fences and daily moves.
Compared to what?
Compared to,
what's your yardstick?
To herding, when, and that's one thing about Africa. They're herding, but they've got like 3 or 4 guys out there walking around with 200 or 300 animals. So by using the animal behavior, I mean, one guy can go out there and keep track of a hell of a lot of animals with very little effort. And considering on how little time it actually takes, I
Yes.
mean, yeah, if well, like on the mashed O, Chris used to take and go make a move with up to 1,800 cows, and he'd go out there and he'd make his move in like 2 hours by himself. What does that leave you for the rest of the day? Why do we think we have to be so busy doing all these things when the two most important things are your grass and your cows? And if you do that, 2 hours, you just move damn near 2,000 cows. Then what do you do for the rest of the day? You can work on your marketing or, take a basket weaving course or whatever. It leaves a lot of free time open.
Kids basketball game, the
Yeah,
telephone
I mean, it
association
frees up your
meeting,
time,
the co-op
but
meeting,
we can't
uh,
wrap our
yeah,
minds
all
around that
kinds of stuff
because
to do.
we've been conned since we could walk. Well, we got to go get this done. We got to go get that done. You've got to be busy. You got to work hard, but in reality, we're making way more work for ourselves and not really getting a good job done doing it.
Yes. And I've kind of having the thought, it's hard for me to put into words, but you know, we use tools to help us accomplish our tasks faster and help us save labor and save time. And it seems like some of the tools that they that we need now, like pick up with a bale bed or cake feeder or stock trailer or whatever, these tools are just getting so expensive that like I feel like we're going to get back to the point where it's going to be more cost effective to use more labor,
Well,
human labor, physical labor
a
than it
pickup
is
and
some
stock
mechanical
trailer
labor and some machines and tools in the future.
allows me to go ahead and do that deal where I've got 3 different herds of over 1,000 head because, I can pick up and I can drive 60, 70 miles and go do that. Where if I was trying to do that without that tool, I'd have to have extra horses stashed out all over the place so I could, do an endurance ride of 60 miles to go do the next one. Well, that's, yeah, sure, I can do that in about 10 hours, but then when do you sleep? Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of the
Yeah.
tools
You can
are,
do that
but
in 10
most
hours,
of the
but then
tools
what do you like when you get there?
that we use they make more work, and I can see the electric fences on the smaller place, but really,
I mean, like you get out to somewhere like Alejandro Carrillo's and yeah, he does
but he
electric
doesn't,
fence. To me,
I don't know if he's doing
seems
polywire.
like
He
that's an
wasn't.
awful big landscape
He
he's running
started out with
polywires
fences
through.
on his
Now you go
on
east
the
of the
bottom ground where he
Mississippi.
had some tobosa that he was able to recover faster, where the pasture sizes were 200 acres. But still, if he's got a crew of like 4 people down there. And if you took out those fences and you're doing an IMG deal, one guy could be doing it. So you don't need the labor. You need somebody that's got an understanding and actually if you could get yourself to get on a horse, to really learn the horsemanship and get to where you really felt comfortable on a horse, you wouldn't, on your place, you wouldn't need your side by side and all of that. You could take a moped to drive out from town, get on your horse and go do what you need to do. Well, we gotta see if it'd have to be an electric moped so that you can fight
I'm
climate.
not sure if I'd be on a moped, maybe motorcycle. Yes. So I
Well,
can fight
somebody's
climate
gotta
change
be their
while
support team.
Taylor Swift and the NFL
Somebody's
fly
gotta
cross
be their
country
support
and
team.
private jets all day. Yeah. Let's worry about the emissions from my pickup.
No, it's a little club that we're not in.
It's a big club and we're not in
Yeah.
it. That's
We're in another little club, but we just don't have much money.
yeah. Yeah. A very, very little club with a lot of big money
But
that
we
we're
have
not in.
more fun than they do. Yeah, it depends on what you call fun.
That's all perspective, I suppose. um,
Yeah, we could do that. We could do
grazing
that.
system branding. We talked a little bit about that last week. You want to get back into that? And this kind of goes like what I was talking about earlier with the bison. This country's so big and so varied from Eastern Oregon to South Texas to Minnesota to Florida. Talk to people in all those locations that raise cattle. And it's always such a different environment. And I think where we've gotten into trouble is, our grazing systems are branded. And I think I think that's a symptom of the over commercialized world that we're
Well,
living
I'm
in,
no worse.
where
I'm
everybody's trying to monetize their time. Everybody wants to monetize their ideas, which I totally respect that. But I think that some of these
yeah.
grazing systems, regenerative grazing systems, and the way they're branded, I think they can lead people
And
to
that
some
is the
dangerous lines of
problem.
thinking and some
You
dangerous
can go onto
management
Facebook
decisions
and you look
if they don't
at all
understand
these
the nuance
different
of what they're trying to do.
supposedly regenerative grazing groups. And I mean, 15 years ago, when Facebook was getting started and you started getting these regenerative grazing groups, there were a few of us on there that actually had an idea what was going on. And, we're trying to help people out. Well, now that it's been going on for a while, you've got people that just started this 2 or 3 years ago, and they're out and they're giving some bad advice. I mean, there's one group, Roger Savory got booted off of it the other day, and I kind of tried, and they didn't do it because I just told the guy that if you're sitting there and you're taking suggestions for spraying chemicals rather than taking care of it biologically, you're not a regenerative group. And the guy gave me a little bit of a response, but he kind of tiptoed around it, but they're saying they're regenerative, but we still got to use this. And, I got onto this with Lee last night. We're doing our branding, but then all these other people are coming in there with putting their conventional twist on it. And people look at that and we're jumping out of our conventional box into a quasi regenerative box. And then everything beyond that, we keep getting locked in these different boxes, and it is because of the branding, but then it's also because of the fact that people are, like I say, trying to monetize it. They're trying to make more money, diversify themselves, and they're jumping out there and just because it worked on their 20-acre place in Arkansas does not mean it's going to work on a 3,000-acre place in Kansas. And people just aren't following that context. But
Yeah.
exactly. And the question I had for Lee last night,
Just because it works in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia doesn't mean it'll work
brush
anywhere
control
else.
And weed control is all a fertility problem, right? Well, let's just make the assumption that it's all a fertility problem. So did you know
yes and
that
no,
you can go onto
but I'll go on.
Amazon and you can buy your soil microbes and fungus? Yes, do it. You can go on to Amazon. I did it the other day. I was just wondering,
What?
this stuff is getting to be such a big fad now. Let's just see something. And yeah, you can go and you can buy you can buy soil biology pack for your garden.
I'm gonna type that in.
Okay.
Soil
So now,
biology
why?
pack for garden. Oh yeah. All kinds of
Pretty
stuff.
cool.
Liquid micro booster,
So
slow
now,
release
here's
organic fertilizer, worm castings, dog urine neutralizer.
So I'm just an idiot with
There's a book,
just working for everybody else and trying to help
microbial
people.
inoculant.
You've got your place.
Okay.
What I want you to do, I want you to go to Amazon and I want you to get some of that. Pick an area where your grass is a little bit thin and you've got you might have some cedars starting to come up. Go treat that area biologically and see what happens. And maybe take a couple of mature cedars and get around there and just spray that biology into the ground around it and say out 10 feet from it. Just see what happens. Okay, but what happens when you cut it down? What
Sir,
happens
if I
though
get
when you
that
cut it
close
down?
to a cedar
Didn't you
tree,
say they kind of
I'm
come back?
probably going to cut it down. No, Eastern red cedar does not come back as long as you get
Well, yeah, but this is
all the green off the tree. As long as you get underneath the lowest branch, it won't come back. They don't
that would be
Eastern
a
red
redeeming
cedar
feature.
does not
But I mean,
resprout from
just
the stump, which
because
is
nobody
like
seems to
it's
be
one redeeming feature.
experimenting with these biologicals on the weed control. I mean, I may go out just for grins and giggles and pick up some of that and spray it, put it down someplace on a friend's place just to see what happens. Well,
I mean, we do occasionally
that's
spray
not
things on
very.
our cedar trees. It's usually
I mean, at one time, yeah, the
flaming
diesel
diesel
was
fuel, but I mean,
it
we do
started
spray
out as
things on
biology
cedar
somewhere
trees.
along the line, but at this point, it'd be considered chemical. I'm talking about doing it biologically, not chemically. It's don't follow along, take it and run with it.
Yeah, I'm with
just
you.
the idea, man. I just give people ideas to run
I'm
with.
following along.
Or proof that, yeah, that son of a buck is crazy, ain't he?
I'm thinking about it. No, it's just I have a hard time swallowing the idea that I can make my soil good enough
Why?
that cedar trees won't grow in it. I
Have you read any? Have you
I
read any
really
of the
struggle with
journals
that idea.
from those old trappers?
because it's
Do you know? Mm,
some of
well,
them.
that's one of our
The
observations.
trees
that I'm
weren't
not so
here
sure that
because there was a
is
lot more fire.
that's that accurate. And it's also another thing that just because you see something, and just because you see something
I
doesn't
can
mean
agree
that
with you
that's
about fire
necessarily
frequency.
the
I
way. I
question
mean,
it
yeah,
too.
you keep your cedars under control by burning them, but what would happen if okay, you burn them off, and then you go through and add your biology to it, and then really maintain your grazing to where you keep improving that biology and see if those cedar trees will come back. I don't think they will.
I think the improvement in
Well,
biology is the correct balance and mix of
mhm,
species. So you said it earlier. Elk were originally a plains animal. Okay. We used to have mule deer here. We used to have antelope here. So between the big herds of bison, antelope, the muleys, and the elk, they
yeah,
used the prairies completely differently than we're using them today with green deer and cows. Because that's what we've replaced the plains ecosystem with. The beautiful complex plains ecosystem that was centered around 4
yeah.
species of ruminants. We've
But
replaced them
it goes
with green machinery, diesel fuel, and black cows. And that's it. So is the biology we need to bring back and improve, is some of that soil biology? Yes. Most of that is above ground biology,
yeah,
but the
true.
two
You
are
got
so
to
tightly
restart that
related.
below
We
ground
can't have
biology. But
better above ground biology until we
the point
restart
I'm
the below
making
ground
is
biology.
every plant. I mean, go to the nursery and you look at plants, and every one of those plants has got a label on there, and it's telling you, well, we need this type of soil, this much water. Uh, Venus flytrap takes distilled water. They got to feed those distilled water. So your if your biology in the ground supports the plants, I mean that's plant succession. I made a comment on Facebook the other day. Oh, you mean to tell me that when you graze it right and the grass comes back in, the grass is invading? We look at this as invasive plants, and it's not. It's just the plant succession. And I've talked to some guys that they're all dead now, but they were about 20 years older than me when I got down here, and they said that when they were kids, there was hardly any brush in this part of the world at all. It was mainly all in just, there'd be a few places and some draws where there'd be some, and then there might be a little bit of creosote, up on top of a hill that wasn't getting grazed. And now alls we have is it's hard to find grass. There's more bare ground and creosote and mesquite than anything because that soil biology's changed. But when you go back through and you graze it right and you start getting your grasses back, well, your soil biology changes, and that that grass coming up around that creosote and mesquite gives you ground level humidity, and that brush winds up getting, not only is the soil biology not right for it, it starts getting fungal infections from the humidity in the grass, and the insects move in and wipe it out. So why wouldn't that happen with your cedar?
That's a good question. That's a good
Well,
question.
does it bring up
Um,
another question?
and I don't have an answer. Uh, I would say that Well,
Mm-hmm.
what it makes me think of is this is just observational evidence, right? When those cedars get about 75 years old, the way they grow down at the base, they start to get what's called inclusions, like two parts of the tree
Yeah.
will kind of like grow together and they'll trap like a little some dirt in there in between pieces of bark as they grow together, and that's where they get infected. So I see a lot of shelter belts that were put in the 30s and the 50s now in this part of the world with cedar trees. And we're starting to see these trees die at the roots and just fall over. In 2 or 3 years, they'll go from a reasonably healthy looking tree, I mean, for a cedar, then it'll turn red, the needles will fall off, and 2 years later, it'll start to fall over. And I can tell that it's been a fungal infection in the tree. Now, the whole time I had the excavator and the mulcher head, like I would go to a tree and it would be 3.5 feet around, completely get that tree gone. Some of them, there'd be a center core that was just rotten. Outside of the tree looked healthy. Branches looked healthy, green, vibrant, whatever. But the internal core of that tree was rotten. And I guess what I'm saying is they do kind of have an expiration date. In my observation, they're only going to live 75 years or so before they start getting that fungal, those fungal and bacteria infections and get fungus and die from the inside. So there's a point to what you're saying. I mean, if we bring back the soil, the correct bacterial fungal ratio, how does that affect the plant community? It's going to affect it. I just have a really hard time with the thought
Well, I'm
that
not saying they wouldn't
soil
grow
health would
at
get good enough
all.
to the
I mean,
point
if you look at a
where
savanna,
cedar
it's
trees
got
wouldn't grow
some
at all.
trees,
I
but it's not like a forest.
can't get there. I just can't get there.
You don't have a complete canopy, and that's basically what it was in your areas around your
Right.
the creeks and rivers. You'd get cottonwoods, but things like the cedar, is cedar native to that? I mean, where do these cedar trees come from?
As far as I can tell, eastern red cedar trees are native to my area and have been here since antiquity. However, we had beaver, we had
That took me
bison,
a
we had
second.
elk, we had muleys, we had turbo goats.
No, I haven't. I've heard of speed
We
goats,
had-
but not turbo goats.
Yeah, you've never heard of antelope called turbo goats?
I'm just sheltered.
Speed goat, turbo goat? What rock have you been living
Pheasant.
under, sir?
See, I figured that out.
Well, do you know
We
what a
had some
ditch chicken is?
pheasant in California, but basically I've never really lived in a place for any length of time
Yes.
that had ditch chickens. But one,
Note about ditch chickens, pheasants. They're
well,
Chinese grouse
you know what
I
think
that are filling the
problem that
ecosystem
we
niche
have.
vacated by the lesser
People
prairie
get upset
chicken
at me
due
because
to
I'll answer a
habitat
question
destruction.
with a question. We're always looking for the answer and then accepting the answer without ever questioning the answer. So every answer to me, there is no end answer. When you think you've got an answer, you should be having another question coming up. So what my question was, okay, you say it's native, but did they spread naturally? Or did they spread because the government decided we all needed shelter belts?
Well, I think the first thing happened They were spreading naturally till probably the 1870s, 1880s, maybe even a little bit later than that. It was probably when the Soil
How
Conservation
much
Service
did that
started up in the
contribute?
30s
How much
after the
did that
Dust Bowl
contribute?
is
It's like
probably when all the shelter
cheatgrass is
belts
the big
started,
problem. And it started
at
out as
least
a
my
solution.
understanding.
So just
I
because we
think it
think
could
we
I think a lot of the cedar tree problem we have was made 1,000 times worse because of plantings between, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I don't like to say this a whole lot. My great grandfather, D.W. Skinner, he was one of those guys that in the mid 50s said, "Hey, these cedar
my
trees are
guy.
kind of pretty. Let's plant some more, make it look like Colorado, and we'll get all the tourists here." Which is probably one of the reasons why when Dad took over the ranch in the mid 80s, it was covered up with cedar trees. So, yes, planting the shelter belts, there were groups of people that planted cedar trees and let them propagate. And the shelter belts, though, I think is the really perpetuates the problem because we got brainwashed thinking trees will bring the rain. You got to have a windbreak or your soil will blow. Like we know none of that's true now. We know none of that's
Okay,
true. Okay, yes, you plant a row of trees alongside the field, you're going to create an area where it's not quite as calm and might not
so
blow as
so
much,
now you want to
but
really
it
upset
doesn't
a bunch
really
of people?
help. What would really help would be having living
Okay.
roots in the whole field
It
365
was
days out of the year.
the it was an educated government
Yes.
program. Was all that was figured out by smart, educated people, and we believed them because by golly, they're the ones that wrote the book. It was just it's kind of like the government branding. We look at this is the solution, but we never question this. We never question past what we see the solution to determine on whether or not that may be a problem later. So every time we find a solution, we need to be picking it apart as we go. We can do it, but we also need to be looking out ahead and asking ourselves questions about what it's going to do later. Okay.
A solution isn't a solution if it kills you next week. Can can we take a quick break? I really got to pee. Okay. Try to edit from there later. Be right back.
Well, I tell you what, I just asked them, how come they weren't heckling us, and they haven't even answered.
And we're back.
Yeah, I figure, yeah, we got two people in there. I figured they would have,
In chat,
they would have had to
I
heckle
think
us at least once or twice, or
we've got a
ask a
couple.
question. Yeah,
Oh, maybe they'll hop
price of
back
tea in
up with some
China.
more questions.
Uh, we're talking about how we look
All
at
right, what were we
something
talking
as a
about?
solution. A- All of these solutions that have caused us so much problem have basically all come out of universities. out of the higher education. And to me, the way they go about things, they
Okay.
PhD. I had a guy describe that to me once as a post, and this guy, he had a bachelor's degree, and he called it a post-hole degree because you get these scientists and they're looking at a fence and they're trying to see how the fence goes, and then they start, well, we're going to study this post hole, and they lose track of all of the rest of the fence. And it's they started doing the studies on holistic plant grazing. How many decades did it take before one of them come up with doing it right where it actually succeeded? They go into it, they've got almost a bias on what they think they're going to prove, and then when they prove it, by God, that's the answer. And they're not they're not asking what's next.
Because it's almost I look at it as it's almost it's almost ironic that we're going to take and apply a reductionist scientific
But
method
that's
to study a
everything is a
holistic
holistic.
system, right? It taking
Yeah.
taking a
Well,
system,
when you
taking a whole
stop and think about it,
system and trying to study it in a reductionist manner, it doesn't
everything's
work.
just part of the whole. Even when you get into physics, it's you look at uh, Tesla, and he was talking
Right.
frequencies, and boy, we've gotten away from that. Oh, that's crazy, and we go on a whole different track. We just get focused where we can only look at a small, narrowly focused deal. If you're looking out, you know, if your viewpoint's looking out at more than just that narrow focus, all of a sudden you got attention deficit syndrome. You've got a problem. We got to give you some Ritalin so you quit asking all these questions because this is the answer. And that's what they get focused on it, and this is the way we're going to do it. It's like we're talking last night when Whit Hibbard and Matt Barnes did their roe deer study. They wouldn't pay me to go up there and put them through a school, but they would send me, Matt was sending me videos and telling me what was going wrong and what was happening with it, and I was telling them what they needed to change. And the, the main thing was they had a set time those cows had to be on water. Well, you're not going to get them to reboot if they're out there and they're eating and they're not ready to drink, and you say, okay, we got to go drink, and then they drink and they're laying down and they're there for 2 hours and they're not done ruminating. You say, okay, we got to get up and go back out to graze. That's going to mess it up. And then they're sitting out there every time they start grazing apart, they're popping them back together rather than just going through the process. And go ahead and once you got them back out to grazing, just leave them alone so they can make up their minds that it's better to, that they want to be together. As long as you keep bumping them, they'd bump one cow in on one side, and then 10 minutes later, a cow on the other side of the herd would go out and they'd have to bump that one in. And they're just like playing, slow motion pong with cows. And then they write up their study and they say that, well, there is some promise to it, but it really didn't work. Well, you got to do it right before it works, and you've got to look at beyond making it do it and letting it happen. And we don't do that with anything. We don't let anything happen without trying to control it. Are you there? Okay. Okay. I thought maybe
Yeah, I'm here. I'm kind of digesting what you're saying. just digesting what you're saying about, we can't just observe something. We have to change it and tweak it. And that's probably true for the vast majority of operators. I'm probably not any different, even though I like to think I am.
Yeah.
That I can observe and say, hey, why'd that happen?
I mean, we should be experimenting with
trying
things
to go out and just
as much as possible, and observing things as much as possible. I mean, I'd see, hell, I'm trying to think now, 4 or 5 years ago was the second time I went up to the mash show, and the cattle were laying down ruminating, and I just went riding by. There was a couple out there at the other end that were starting to graze out. I wasn't quite ready for them, so I was just going to kind of turn them to graze back towards the herd. And I'm riding along, and I noticed something that I'd never noticed before. You're just going by them, and the cow isn't moving, it isn't getting up. You're not putting any pressure on it, right? You're not putting any stress on that cow. Well, I was kind of watching this one cow, and she's chewing her cud. And then as I got closer, she just stopped, and her ears kind of adjusted a little bit. And I looked over my shoulder as I went by, and then she went back. And some of them will, as you're going by, I started watching that, and some of them will either quit chewing cud, or they'll start chewing really fast and then start to get up. And you're not thinking you're putting any pressure on them. And I was talking about that with Pedro when I stopped by his place at Oklahoma on the way through, and of course they were having him do everything with side-by-sides and saying, oh, that side-by-side doesn't put any stress on them. So we went out driving around a bunch of cows, and they were doing the same thing with that side-by-side, only they were doing it from further away than they were with the horse.
Yes. That's kind of what I was envisioning in my head. It's like they say, well, it doesn't happen with a side-by-side. No, it just happens before you can even see it. And the reason I know is I've put a drone up way before I've even gotten close to the cattle. I've put a drone up, watched the cattle, watched the first group of cattle that I'm going to come in contact with, or that are going to feel any sort of stress or pressure from my presence in the pasture. It doesn't matter what you do, how careful you are, your presence in the pasture, whether you're on foot, on a horse, in a side-by-side, or flying a helicopter, your presence has changed the way those animals are behaving and will affect the way those animals behave for some time after you leave the pasture. Every time you go there, every time you interact with those animals,
they're trying to learn anything.
They're trying to teach you something, and they're trying to learn something from you.
My head around the fact that they're trying to teach you anything other than when they run you over to leave their calf alone. But yeah. I said other than that situation. But
she's still teaching you something. She's trying to give you a message.
We don't look, how to put this. What we do affects these cows so much and can change how much these cattle accept us or don't accept us. I know you've seen the video. I've got that one about my self-gathering cows. You've seen that one? Okay, those cows came in 2 different truckloads. The one was only a couple hours late because it took them longer to get them gathered than they thought. And both of these were just like in a little section trap next to the pens. The other one, they were going to have those trucks loaded by 8:30 in the morning and have them to me by noon. They didn't get them into the pens until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So a month later, and I'm only going and riding through them, a couple times a week, and I needed to move them out of the way because I had a couple hundred head of yearlings that I had to move through that pasture. And I just wanted them to. It was 1,000-acre pasture, so I just wanted to move them to be grazing to where those calves wouldn't see them. And I get there, and they were already going off from water. Well, I got there, and all I did is turn my horse towards those ones that were leaving, and they turned around and came back. Some of them were coming in at a run. So they went in less than 2 months, they went from, a crew of guys going out there, couldn't get them gathered, to one guy go out there and just move their horse at a different angle, and they turn around and run back to them. I mean, that sounds crazy, but that's how much you can affect the behavior on them. So why do we need to keep controlling them with fences? And you made the comment earlier on the on those collars. Well, if you take a normal herd of cows that scatter out, and you're going to control them with those collars, if you don't put a collar on every cow, the only ones that are going to work with that electric fencing is going to be the half dozen or so that you have that have the collars on. The rest of them are going to keep doing their same behavior. So why not just spend a week messing around? You're not really working that hard to change their behavior to where you can control their grazing and have them grazing right without having to put in the labor of spending all day, every day with them.
Not everybody wants to saddle a horse every day,
what I'm
Bob.
saying, though.
They want to be able to sit in their office and move cows
then what
on
do you
their
have cows
iPad
for?
like a video game.
Why not just have
Which, I mean,
games?
admittedly sounds pretty cool.
I mean, I'm in this because I really like playing with cows and
I mean,
horses and being on the land. I've passed up management programs because, we're going to give you this promotion. We're going to make you the livestock manager in this feedlot. And I said, yeah. And then I got to be in the office all the time. I'm never going to get on a horse, right? Well, yeah, you won't have to, being out here in this sub-zero weather with the wind blowing. And I'd rather be there than in that office. So if you're looking for that office job, why are you even, wanting to have that ranch or be in the cattle business if you don't want to have any sort of a connection with your cattle and your land? Because that's where you're going to make the improvement in the cattle and in the land, is being on it, observing and adjusting to it.
Yes. Yes. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, if I had GPS ear tags or grazing collars, I would be in love with the data. Like, being able to know how long and hard they grazed a particular part of the pasture, have a grazing heat map of where they spent their time through the day. That's valuable information.
Yeah, it's valuable.
That's very valuable information.
I was going to ask you,
what is really good for? I don't know. I want it. Like that's just it. I want it. I want it. The value in it of being able to tell on a day by day of their grazing pressure in the paddock. If you have, now granted, what I would do is I would go out and I would kind of get an inventory of the pasture, like maybe even sketch a map, like say, Oh, the southwest part, it's a little heavier on onion grass. The northwest part, we've got some clovers. The east part, we've got more cool season. And just make those notes, turn the cows
Yeah.
in, collect the data for a day or two, move them out, and then look at
Well,
the
yeah,
data and see where they grazed and
that
when.
could be
Like, okay, when were they hitting
useful.
the
It would.
clover? When were they over here on the
I
cool season?
really kind
When
of
were
wish
they
that
over
with
here
the
at the warm
primers to do
seasons?
something like that, because she's got pastures where she's got some bottom that's like sub-irrigated. The grass is washy, and underneath the cottonwoods, and then it goes up a hill and up onto a mesa. And before she got started, they played 10 kinds of hell just getting their cattle to go up on top of the mesas. And then they'd come back down, they wouldn't go back up on their own. But since she's got them rebooted, she's found that they will go down into that washy stuff for a day or two, but then they go up on the side hills and up on the top of those mesas on their own to balance out the rumen. Now, on a situation like that, yeah, it'll be kind of interesting to just let those cows sit and just put them into that pasture and then watch how they're grazing. But for the most part, that's just, you like that data because it gives you something to look at. And well, see, I've got a problem that I'm highly
I
dyslexic
like
with
maps.
numbers,
I'm a map nerd. Maps.
and I
Show me
look at
data
those.
on a
I
map
look
and I
at
love it.
those graphs and that, and I can screw up what they mean really well. I mean, I can't. That last feedlot I was in, they call it the hospital pen. They called me and they go, "Where did you get this from?" And I go, "Well, the number's right there, but this number isn't in the books." And what I was doing is a four-letter deal, 4 number tags. I was swapping the outside 2 and the inside 2 when I wrote it down. And so well, what does that number say? It's not in the books. And I would read it back correctly. Once they figured out how my brain malfunctioned with those numbers, they knew exactly what the numbers were when I brought them in. But for me to look at data in a number form is not, it's not very good for me. You like the numbers?
Oh, if you just have a big
Yeah.
sheet of numbers like a PowerPoint or an Excel spreadsheet, I'm out. Like, give me bar graphs, give me pie charts, give me a heat map. Like, give me a visual representation of the data and not just the numbers.
Yeah.
Give me enough time, I can wade through the numbers.
Yeah.
You show me a map or a graphic,
Oh,
I've got it, like, instantly. All right, we got another question from chat. Ross says, you want all this technology so you can be out of the pasture and still collect data, but why
Yeah.
not use technology and set up your buggy like an office and observe in the pasture in real time? I think that's a great idea. And last night while I was taking a shower, I was thinking about how would I set up my rig where I could do everything out of it. What would my ideal rig be? And it'd be, I guess we'll jump in this rabbit hole for a minute. It'd be something like a Kubota RTV that had a hydrostatic drive from 0 to 25 miles an hour. It would be standing type controls on the driver's side. So I'd have like a little seat you could lean on, but you're basically kind of just standing there driving like some old timey delivery trucks from the 40s or 50s. Like, sure. But then, like where the passenger seat would be, that's where I'd keep like tools and fence supplies and things like that. So if I had to get out, I didn't have to sit up out of a seat. I just had to kind of like reach over, grab something and step down and I could work. I also wouldn't have a door on that driver's side. So I could stand there and drive.
I want to see
and
that
work
when you got
outside the door, work on
storm
the
going
fence.
through.
I still get to the point. I still get to the point where I got to think about like, what is this replacing? how much is this technology costing, not just in terms of money and upfront purchase, but how much does it cost in energy to keep this thing going? So I think about those things, and having technology is great when you're using it how it's designed for it. And I'm not real sure I want to take my laptop out in the Rockshire all day and let it bounce around and, go from hot to cold and be in all the dust.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of problems with technology just not lasting in the field. So I just don't take it in the field anymore. I take my phone and maybe a couple of cameras, but as far
I've
as
heard your
laptops and
man.
things like that, that's the quickest way for me to kill a laptop is take it to the ranch. It'll probably die within 30 days. So
Well, what I'm saying is
yeah,
we're letting the
I just
technology think for us,
technology's great. It's just we've got to
and it
be
really
we've got to
isn't.
be
It
careful.
I've come up with the theory that the Facebook fact checkers is an AI program. No, it is an AI program that was designed by liberals, but
I
it's an
thought it was
AI
a bunch
program.
of liberals in India.
Why would you? Why? Oh yeah, yeah. This is a
How worried
okay.
about
How do
are you
it
worried at all
learns?
about AI taking
And
over?
I know I've told you this before, but it's been I don't know, 10 years ago or so. Microsoft gave an artificial intelligence machine a Twitter account. They had to turn it off within 24 hours because it became racist. Now they didn't say how it became racist or or how that racism looked. It didn't say if it just couldn't stand white people or couldn't stand black people or couldn't stand Indians or whatever. It just became racist. So you've got these programs, they get a program, and then they're going onto the internet because that's where all of our knowledge is at. And it's picking and choosing out of there. Well, if it has the slightest bit of bias in it, and it really doesn't have any way of double checking, if you have an artificial, well, exactly, and it's okay.
A
Look
bias tends to
at
get
the deal.
reinforced
Alan
if it's
Savory
not
had
checked.
that debate with George Monbiot. And there are people out there that they are just convinced that George is right on things. They're convinced that there is absolutely no way in hell that regenerative grazing can work. And I mean, I'm not talking about your guy that is mopping the floor at Home Depot because he didn't get his college or his high school diploma. I'm talking about people that have got master's degrees and PhD degrees that fall into that. They cannot think outside of the one little box they're in. Once they're in there, they refuse to leave it. And that is what I think AI will wind up doing. No, no, I think it's going to, I think it, yeah,
Think it'll help. You think it'll break those
I think it's
boxes, or
going
do
to
you
get
think it'll put?
way worse.
Do you
And
think it's going to get worse?
I, w- the reason
Okay.
I told you about changing my internet service. Well, Windstream has got and H&R Block both have got artificial intelligence chats to get you to the right person. You have a problem, you ask the question, and they go, well, pick a question from this line. And they never give you a question that they don't know anything about the question that you're asking, and they just keep running through the loop.
Right. It's like none of these things you're telling me could be
well,
the
no,
problem
when I did finally
are
get to a
actually
human
what my
being on
problem
that
is.
on that
I
deal
just
with
need to speak to a
Windstream,
human being
I spent
for 90
almost
seconds to
2
solve all
hours
of
on the
this.
phone, going from one person to another, telling me that my problem was could not possibly happen, even though I had the email pulled up that I'd gotten from their their payment investigation department, telling me that there is somebody else in this town of 1,500 that is using my my credit card on Windstream on an auto pay. Now figure out how that happens. That's I've gone through it all, and that's the only thing that has been wrong with that credit card. I'm having to get a subpoena to find out the address and the person's name because they won't tell me. My suspicion is it's going to come back out. It's going to be to this address, and it's going to be me. One account's to Robert and one's to Bob. But I mean, they don't think past. They won't even listen to what you're
Okay.
saying about the problem. They just keep popping you off on another person. I talked to the billing department 3 times. I got sent back to the billing department. Well, yeah, I know, but the whole thing is that eventually I got to a person that
Well, I mean, your
figured it
problem's
out.
not their problem.
But
They
the
don't care.
artificial intelligence, I finally got to the point. I just started I just started typing in large letters. Give me a person. Give me a person. Give me a person, dumbass. Give me a person, you stupid. And it finally got frustrated enough with me that it actually sent me to a person instead of cutting me off.
I can
Yeah, yeah. But no, it's
talk to a real human.
the
Talk to a real human.
artificial intelligence
Yeah.
is like an ego. And what does your ego do? Your ego prevents you of looking at, your ego prevents you from thinking that what
Okay.
you're doing is wrong, and also that maybe something else would be better or right. So that artificial intelligence it's going to get down to the point where, well, I mean, you've seen
Okay.
Terminator. I mean, what is going to stop that? What is going to stop that from happening? These people push it, go, oh, that won't happen. That won't happen. Well, why
Yes.
not? And they can't tell you, like, oh, well, we're putting in safeguards. Oh, you mean like you can't hack into the Pentagon? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
We've got safeguards. All your data is going to be safe. Yeah. AT&T gets hacked and
well,
75 million people
what
have their user data exposed on
what
the dark web.
company
Like,
hasn't been?
thanks AT&T for
I
helping
mean,
keep
what
my data safe. You're one of the world's biggest
the Pentagon's been
telecommunications
hacked.
companies.
IRS has been hacked. I mean, how
And if you can control it from the internet, so
Really,
can
if
somebody
all you
else.
need to do
If you can
is you
connect
don't
to it through the
the
internet,
machine does not have to
somebody
have
else
internet
can
access.
break into that
All it
system.
has to do is
That it
be able to be accessed by another computer. Voting machines are not accessible to the internet, but the computer that they hook
yeah.
up to is hackable to the internet. So, you hack that one computer and then you hack the well,
Even if it's not
yeah,
connected to the
yeah.
internet, it's still a
Well,
digital device and it can
have you
be
ever gone on
it,
to
it can
tech
be
support with the computer
it can be
and they
modified. It can be
tell you,
tampered
well,
with.
power it down and turn it off, yeah, and let us turn it on from this end. And yeah, I mean, I've had it. I've done that before, where I have my computer turned off, sitting there,
How
and
can you do that?
all of a sudden it turns on, and you know, some guy in India just turned on my computer and is doing diagnostics on it. I'm not even touching the machine, and they're turning it on, turning it off, and doing all sorts of stuff with it. So anytime we're going to let give these computers the ability to learn, and face it, if they can learn, the computer they will eventually teach themselves programming and be able to turn on our computers from India, the artificial intelligence program. So, really, why I don't understand why people they got to jump on every new thing. Oh, this is cool. This is going to really help us. And I don't see where it's going to be. It takes away our ability. It takes away, I'm not going to say it takes away our ability. It takes away the necessity for us to think. And since we're kind of lazy, we're just going to let them do it. We're going to let them do the thinking for us. We'll let them write the articles. I think it's probably right around the corner in the next year or two, we'll have the first artificial intelligence produced movie. And it won't have it won't have a live person involved in it. Other than somebody going, "Hey, make a movie about this," and then it will.
Okay.
It'll just make, like say the deep fake video. It'll basically be a deep fake video, completely computer generated without a person involved. So that's really going to help our productivity, isn't it?
Okay. Here's a fun one. Well, here's a fun one. So this will be episode 164 of the Ranching Reboot podcast, as long as everything goes smooth on the back end after finish this recording. So of 164 episodes, a lot of them are between an hour and a half and 2 hours. Let's cut that in half, because half the talking's me, half the talking's the guest. So there's 80.
Oh, they can have you doing anything. Did you know that
hours
bombed the
of
Capitol?
me talking? There's 200 hours of me talking that's available. My voice can be cloned. Maybe already has been, and it could be so convincing you wouldn't know it wasn't actually me sitting here talking to you. So I bring this up because I saw this on a TikTok last night.
That's what I'm saying. You're laying in bed with the wife, sleeping in, and I'm sitting.
How do you know I'm not really an AI right now, Bob? Okay. I'm like, what do I have to do to make that one happen? Anyway, no, this is what I saw. It kind of scared me. It's like this guy, he's a similar situation as me. He's a content creator, so there's hundreds of hours of his voice out on the internet. He called his bank and he said, "Don't take any more transactions from me over the phone.
Yeah.
Make sure I'm there in person to do it, because there are thousands of hours of my audio and my voice can be faked." And I call my bank and they know me, they know my voice.
Well, exactly.
And they never really ask me for a whole lot of confirmation when I'm calling and moving money around. So,
how much
it's only a matter of time before somebody's voice gets faked and their bank account gets drained because.
And I don't mean just I mean walking around and doing things. They have enough. There's enough data on the internet right now to take and do a movie. They could show you walking into a bank and robbing it on their security cameras, and you would have no recourse. you'd have no way of proving that that isn't you.
Yep.
I am.
We live in a world where nothing is real anymore. The only thing you can trust as real is what you're seeing in person.
Mhm.
And to be honest with you, that's really scary. That is a scary place to be, that now
Exactly.
in 2024, you
And
cannot trust
that goes with
anything you
every
see
bit
on
of the
your
news.
phone that it's not doctored or digitally altered.
You know,
Everything you see on TV, everything you see on your phone, everything
Yeah.
you see on your computer
and every bit of it is
has been
biased in
or
one way
could
or
be
another.
digitally manipulated in some way
You
to
know, it's just
conceal the truth.
like we're talking the other day about history. It was written by the victors, and then the next person. Well, the government's a conspiracy theory. You know,
God,
it's you've
let's
got
talk about
people
some
that are
conspiracy
supposedly
theories
elected
now.
to take care uh, of the public, but then if you look at the laws that they write, they're not really protecting the public for the most part. I mean, look at your bankruptcy laws. Exactly. You know, you look at the deal with Social Security. If
It's
you are on Social
protecting
Security
the
and you make
public
an
or
additional
enriching their own bank accounts.
32,000 a year between you and your spouse, they charge you on almost they count almost half of your Social Security as regular income, and if you're self-employed, you also have to pay the 15% for the Medicare and Social Security. Did you know that if you are, so this is the government's really watching out for the people on this, and if you take your
Yep.
car down and you're going to get it worked on in a shop, and that shop files for bankruptcy while your car is in their shop, it becomes property of the estate bank, the estate bank that's handling the bankruptcy. So, I mean, if jewelry being cleaned, anything like that, books, if
Okay.
you have books with a distributor and that distributor goes bankrupt, you lose them. And even though, even though exactly.
Even though you paid for them, they were just
And then
storing them and
that
fulfilling
man,
orders for you. You lost all your
well, the
inventory
thing
because
is,
they
the
screwed
bad
up.
part about it is they will wind up
And they'll say,
selling
well,
that,
you should have
auctioning
had
that stuff off,
insurance
and
on it.
of course you can't afford to buy them back, so somebody else, buys 2,000 books that you had with that distributor, and then your book sales plummet because guess what? You're competing against yourself because that person can sell the books that you have to have $10 out of them to pay for all the cost in publishing, and they can sell them for $3. So all these laws and that, I used to be law and order, and anymore it's like I'm like up yours. They're just not. I don't mess with the IRS, but just about anything else, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and if they don't like it, give me free room and board. Yeah,
Yeah, right. You're
yeah.
kind of
Geez, I
you're
don't
kind
have
of
to
the
go
point in
out
your
in the
life where
wind
it's
and
like,
rain and
oh,
snow and
3 meals a day and a warm place to sleep every night. That sounds like a nice
go
vacation.
go to Nevada where they got a prison farm, and I can get in on the wild horse program or the cow program and that, and
Uh,
and of course they don't make you work as long hours as you do if you weren't in jail. It may be. It may be. Now that you've got me thinking about it, it may be.
Well, there you go. Is that what's next for Bob?
Oh, I don't know.
On
Today
that
is
note,
the
that's
start
probably a
of
good
that.
place to go ahead and
Of
wrap up.
course,
How do you
it'll
want
be
to end
late.
this?
You won't. So that, yeah, I know. So they won't be able to attend that Axor deal that
People
just
won't hear
started.
this till next week, Bob.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah, but if you get if they the thing
Well,
is I
that's
don't think
recorded, so
that
that can be viewed later, right?
they don't get the
So
access to it. If
just
you've registered for it, or if you've registered for any of their seminars, their webinars, you can go in and look at all of the different individual presentations, which so it's Ag Stewards.
and
Jared
what
Sorensen, he's
website is
out in
that? What
Nevada,
group
and
is
I
that?
mean it's pretty cool. He's got Roger Savory's going to
Okay.
start giving a presentation there in a couple of minutes. And Jim Garrish is going to be on there, Dave Voth, John Haskell, Jaime Elizondo, and then I'm giving my presentation on the paradigm shifts and into the instinctive migratory grazing, but I'm going in by breaking it down one paradigm at a time as to what paradigms you're breaking to try to get people to open up their minds a little bit to be able to accept it. Because, like you say, if you have never seen it, it sounds like BS to most people. So I'm changing the deal. So it'll be more of my thoughts, deep thoughts from the shallow end of the pool.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
get on their
Great.
mailing list.
I will
Everybody should at least
put a
get on
link
their
to that
mailing list
in the show
because
notes.
they have they
so
only
people
do
can
like
go
one
check that
podcast
out
a month,
and
but
find out
then
more information about that.
every couple of months they do these webinars, and I mean they get they had your good buddy that we can't mention his name because you've got to send off the little ding dong deal, cash register. He was on there. So they get a lot of people with a lot of good information. You don't have to
Yeah.
pay
Okay.
to go to the conference. You don't or to attend it. You don't have to pay for a room while you're there. I mean, you can register for it, and then after they get up the individual presentations, I mean, you can hook your computer up to where it shows on your big screen TV and sit there eating popcorn in your underwear to watch it. So it's one of those deals that it's just a worthwhile deal, and it's possibly in a lot of ways better than going in person. Okay. Okay. Just
Okay.
next door.
Very cool.
Oh,
We'll make sure we
I
get
don't
some
know.
links
Just
for that in
have a
the
good
show
day.
notes.
I've got to go spend money on hay. So,
Well, anything else? Well,
no, it's
I
not a
mean,
hay hab. This is for my horses, and they're in town. And it's like
we'll
I get rid of them, then I got to write
harass
somebody
each other
else's
about the hay
dates.
habit later.
And it's like here, I think day after tomorrow, I'm gonna have 3 or 4 days worth of work. So
Yeah.
I mean, they pay for themselves. It's just that I don't like having to go buy hay. I'd much rather be out in town and just have them on pasture. Okay, well,
I can understand that.
oh yeah, there's
Probably another conversation to another
well,
time of how we screwed up horses compared to what the Comanches had.
that's a whole other deal, because as far as I'm concerned, we don't train the horse to do much of anything. Anything that we ask a horse to do, they already know how to do. So why are we spending all this time? Our job isn't to teach that horse anything at all.
Yeah.
It's just to communicate to the horse how and when we want it done. It's communication more than teaching. And that's the way it goes anyways, because I don't teach you anything. I give you the idea, I'll give you the concepts, and then you've got to kind of figure it out. I can't sit there and tell you how to do it, and then you go do it, because the situation is constantly in flux or happen to constantly adjust, so you have to develop a feel. So with that, my network's struggling again. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Brian. You have a good day.
I like it, and I think that's a good place
I
to
enjoyed
end.
it. Talk to you later. Bye.
Well, thanks for your time this morning, Bob. You too. And gang, have a great week. We'll see you.